Hi, I'm Greg, and I'm here to talk again about macOS keyboard bindings on Linux. This is a topic that I first discussed about a year and a half ago. I published this video on the channel, and back then I was going through the reasons why you might want to use macOS keyboard bindings on Linux, and I went through a bunch of tools and techniques that you can use to effectively achieve Mac-like behavior on a Linux box. And I've been using this set of tools and techniques for over a year and a half now without any problems. I'm quite happy with how it works. But there's one thing that I hadn't been able to get working yet, and that's this thing called dead keys or dead letters, which you may have heard them as. This refers to when you need to type symbols that aren't in the kind of core ASCII style set. Things like characters with accents over them, or maybe symbols like the euro symbol. On Mac, you'll hold down a certain key combination and that'll be called a dead key. And then when you tap another character, you get the symbol you were looking for. So the thing that I just figured out how to do was to get those same behaviors happening on Linux. And so that's what this video is about. If you're not in a situation where you need to type accented characters, like maybe you're not like me, maybe you don't live in Spain and have to type this kind of stuff, then actually watching this other video might be more interesting to you. The other one's half an hour long, goes into a lot of detail about that base layer of modification, things like the kind of universal shortcuts for cut, copy, paste, opening and closing tabs, windows, and so on, that are very useful and kind of necessary if you want to bring across the macOS muscle memory to work on Linux. If, however, you want to learn some nitty-gritty details of how keyboard binding works in Linux and the X Windows system, or you live in a situation like I do where you have to type these characters, then maybe today's video will be interesting for you. I don't think I'm going to be talking for half an hour though, it'll be a little bit shorter than the last one. So let's dive in. So I made these notes on my wiki about the existing tools that are available for you to type these special symbols before we get into the customization that I want to show you. Now I'm using Colmac. But what I say for Colmac is true for a lot of other keyboard layouts. They come with some so-called dead letters already defined. And so an example of that would be like this first one here, to type the Spanish letter ñ, which is the letter N with a tilde on top. On Linux, you would type Alt-GR, which is short for alternate graphic, which is the right side Alt key. So you'd type right Alt backtick, and then an N, and you'd get ñ. And that works, that's great, but the problem is, it's very different from what you would type on Mac, which would be Option N. In other words, you'd be activating a modifier like on the opposite hand, and also the keys that you're typing in addition to the modifier are different. Similar story for other things like U with an umlaut, the two dots on top of it. So on Linux, that would be right Alt D followed by U, and on macOS it would be Option U. So once again, the modifier changes hands and you're tapping a different key, so it's really hard to train your muscle memory to get that right. It's nice that there's a way of doing it, but I would rather not have to learn that other way of doing it. There are some instances though where I can't even, I haven't yet discovered a way to do it. And one of those would be, for example, A with an acute accent on the top. Now normally you could get that by typing right Alt T followed by A. Another way you could get it would be to type right Alt A. Now neither of those are going to work because I've actually mapped right Alt T to behave like new tab, because that's what I'm used to from the Mac. And similar with right Alt A, I mapped that to be select all. So I can't use that. And I can't type A with an acute accent. The other vowels though I can type. So for example, E, I, O, and U, they're all just right Alt with the vowel. So that's good, but once again, they're different from what I would type in the Mac. So for example, to type O with an acute accent on the Mac, I would type Option E, O. And on Linux, it's right Alt O. So once again, modifiers on the wrong hand and you're pressing different keys. So it's really hard for me to get used to that. And I would rather just have one set of muscle memory than having to maintain two sets. So there is a way. The good news, there is a way to have your cake and eat it too, and get dead letter workings on Linux the way they work on macOS. I'm going to show you that now. So I'm going to go over to the terminal here, and the thing that I just learned, this wonderful file called Xcompose that you can create and you can define dead letter sequences in this file, and it does exactly what we need. So in this example, we see I've got a function key and then another button and then something that it maps to. So the full syntax here is, usually it's some kind of dead letter, like it could be dead acute, or it could be another common one you'll see is multi-key. It's basically some kind of dead key that is used as a cue that a dead letter sequence is starting. And then you have some other key, or maybe a sequence of keys. You have what they map to. You have an optional Unicode number, and you have an optional comment. So that's the basic syntax. They can also take modifiers up the front. They can take a bang modifier, which says that the match. What the bang modifier does is it says the match is exact. So my understanding is this means that, for example, bang meta would mean this line should apply if the meta key is held down and no others, along with the following keys. For example, if I also had shift held down, it wouldn't work. Likewise, I think the tilde may be used to say, don't make this line, only match this line if there are no modifiers. In practice, however, I found that this didn't actually work because the modifier is ignored. Because my first attempt at doing this was to write something like meta n should map to enya. And I found that it was as though the modifier wasn't there, because even when I typed n without a modifier, I got this behavior, which meant that I couldn't type in n anymore. And doing a little bit of research, I found that this is apparently expected. The man page says that you can put modifiers here, but then I found another resource that indicates that modifiers are just ignored. So it's expected that they don't work, and I had to find another way to do it. And so the way you can see that I've done it in this file is, instead of using multi-key, which would normally be right-alt, I'm using function keys, and I'm using another layer of the system to turn my macOS style dead keys into function keys before they get to the compose layer and do their job. So we've got F21, F22, and F23. So let's look at what I'm using to get those things transformed. I'm using Interception Tools for that, which is something that I discussed in the other video. But the kind of very brief nutshell description of it is that it's a very low-level abstraction that grabs the hardware keyboard device, reads the keyboard events that are coming from it, allows you to run arbitrary code to transform those events, and then uses that transformed event stream to present a new virtual keyboard to the rest of the operating system. So your operating system doesn't actually listen to the real keyboard, it can't, in fact, because the device has been taken over by Interception Tools. The other apps on the operating system listen to this virtual keyboard, and they get all the transformed events. So we're going to use this tool to turn, for example, option N into F21. And we're going to turn option E into F22 and option U into F23. So let's look at how that's done. I'm going to, it's this file here, Mac to Linux. So you can see here, this is what I had before, a bunch of mappings that I'm using to give Mac style behavior to Linux keyboard events. So this example here says, whenever you see the Colmac A key pressed, with either Alt key, you should remap that to Colmac A with Control held down. So this is what enables me to press Command A and have it behave as Select All, because that Command A gets turned into Control A, and then the browser or whatever app I'm running does the right thing with it. So what I've added here is these lines here, these so-called dead key mappings. And as you can see there, like the first one says, when you see N on the Colmac keyboard layout, and option is held down, when meta is held down, turn that into F21. And so that'll go through the various layers of the system and arrive at our Xcompose layer. And then every X application that's listening will see F21 transformed into the, according to the dead letter rules in the Xcompose file. So it works. Let me just prove that by, I'm going to write, actually, I'm going to turn on raw here so you can actually see what's happening. So if we go here, raw, okay. So I'm going to do that again. So down the bottom you can see what I'm typing. I'm going to hit Option N. and that came through as F21N. And now I'm going to do a capital version of that, so that'll be Option N, Shift N. And there we got F21 Shift N. For the acute characters, let's say I want to do something like capital O with an acute accent, so that's going to be Option E, Shift O. So that came through as F22 Shift O. And the last one to show is the umlaut, so I'll just show that simply as Option U, U. That came through as F23U. So you can see that's how it's working. So there's one little extra thing we need to know to make all this work, and that is that because X has multiple like historical ways of customizing the keyboard, and they all kind of coexist, they don't necessarily play that well together. So if we look, for example, at my Xinit RC, you'll see normally in an Xinit RC you have some lines like these ones here, and they source some files, including, where is it, Xmod map. Xmod map is like the old way of customizing the keyboard, and the new way is set XKB map. Now I'm actually using both of these, and this is where it gets a little bit uncomfortable, but I'm going to open my Xmod map. You can see here that in order to get this to work, I had to tell it that the key codes coming from the kernel and going through Interception Tools, when you see an F21, like it really is F21, because ironically, if I didn't do this, then set XKB was turning those key codes into something else again. And so I think the best way to show you that would, actually, I'm just going to get out of here and do git show. This is a good way to look at it. There is a file here at user share x11 xkb symbols inet that gets automatically included when I set my Colmet keyboard layout, that effectively remaps those function keys that I was relying on to these touchpad related ones, which I don't actually need because like I'm on a desktop computer, it's not a computer with a touchpad, and effectively means that the Xcompose layer is seeing the wrong key codes. So it's not seeing the function keys, it's seeing these like special like media key type things. And one way of seeing that in action is to look at the output of events that are perceived at the X layer using this thing called XEV. So basically, you know, when I do stuff with the mouse or when I type letters, we see what events are happening on that window. And so, for example, when I press, right now what I'm doing is I'm pressing and releasing the Option key on the left. You can see that showing as a key press and a key release for Super L, left super, which is the same as Option. So what was happening was I would hit Option N, for example, and that came through correct. Whoops, let me just do that again. Option N. You see that came through as F21. What was actually happening though was it was coming through as XF86 touchpad toggle, right? Which is not very helpful. And so the way I've got everything to line up again is to create this Xmod map file. So let's just look at that again. That basically says, yeah, really, seriously, don't do those overrides. Let F21's key code be F21. And the reason why that is coming through is because when I start my X session, you know, I set the keyboard layout using set XKB map, and that applies the unwanted settings, and then I just have to source my Xmod map file, and that applies those little overrides that I care about. So my next steps here are going to be to address a few more of the dead keys that are useful on OS 10 or OS X or whatever it's called, macOS, that aren't available on Linux by default. So I'm thinking like I definitely want to do M- because I typed that a fair bit. Probably want to do the Euro symbol because I typed that a fair bit. And then, you know, maybe a couple others, but probably not too many. You know, Mac basically has something special defined for every key, and I don't have enough function keys to do all of that. So I'm just going to pick the ones that I care the most about. So I hope that was useful and you enjoyed it and you learned something. And thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.